to audit your creations from now on to bring more objectiveness to your design decisions. Let's start with principle number 1, space. Space is super important, and it's the element that will help us to draw focus and attention. So the space is what allows the users to be guided, and it improves a lot the legibility. When you create space between elements, you're clearly separating them and helping the users to see them individually and make sense of the whole content of your page. So this example here of Revolut is an online bank, a bank challenger, fintech, and they make use of space very well. So if you look to this homepage, you see actually that the content briefs, and we see clearly 2 blocks on the homepage. On the left, you have the value proposition with a call to action that is asking you to introduce your phone number. And on the right, you have this little video or animation to just bring a bit of more, feel to the page. Element number 2, proximity. Proximity is what's gonna help us to create relationships. The elements that are close together, they will appear to be more related than the things that are spaced farther apart. So it's just the opposite of this space. If you want to separate things visually, you bring space in. If you want them to basically be part of a whole, we actually make them close to each other. So this is exactly what we do when we create components. We bring things together, and in the end, little fragments of your visual elements, a little picture or a text or a heading and a button, they will be perceived as one visual element, one single visual element. So have a look, for instance, on this page, there are clearly 3 sections separated with space. And on the top, we see these little cards, these 4 cards, where you can access the different categories on Airbnb. And then you have these other cards in the middle to highlight the luxe options. And at the bottom, you have 5 cards to introduce you to hubs, let's say the city pages. Element number 3, alignment. So alignment is what will bring some cognitive stability, some calmness, and make sense or make the content more scalable. So if you have a look at this page from Uber, you will see that the very first element on the top, our commitment to your safety, is perfectly aligned with the whole rest of the elements in the page. So the about us and then sign up to drive, these 3 sections, they start with the same margin left in the page. And also, they also have the same space on the margin right. So in HTML, the div that helps us to bring this alignment to the whole page content, you're already very likely familiar with it, is your container, right? So alignment is very important because when it comes to scan the content, and you will see there are different patterns for us to scan a page. There is the Z pattern and the F pattern. In this case, we're gonna follow an F pattern. So our eyes goes from the top left and reads the first line entirely, and then the second line maybe less entirely than the first, and then the last even less. So it's, you imagine an F draw on top of this page, and with alignment, we help that actually, make the content more scalable. Next, very important principle is the contrast, everybody. So contrast will define the hierarchy of your visual elements and helps us to add the focal points to show which parts are most important. So I'm very sure that if you look to this page on Spotify, your eyes are actually being drawn to the button Get Premium, because it's a very vivid color. It almost pops out of the screen and it generates a lot of contrast. And if you see also the 2 cards, the one that's Spotify free and Spotify premium, you understand that Spotify actually wants us to get premium. So they are also using this technique of the ghost button on the left, and the primary button is the main call to action in the page. You also notice other elements there that improves the contrast. So for instance, the very heading of the page, listen free or subscribe to Spotify Premium. It's in bold, the same as the price is also in bold. Both prices are in bold. So the, um, the thickness of your text also generates this feeling of contrast. The bolder the information, more contrast you're gonna bring. And the third thing that allows us as designers to play with the visual hierarchy is playing with the opacity or of your colors. So for instance, the text on the card Spotify free, you will see there one in black and others that in light gray. So it's clearly showing us what is the free option doing and not doing for you. So basically, if you look to this design, you can actually see that the elements that are darker, they also pop out a bit from the screen. So it generates this feeling of a 3D. Although the page is completely 2D, whenever you play with, the color, the darkness of the text and the boldness, it will allow your information to pop out a bit from the screen and call users' attention. Then let's move to our last element, consistency. It's very important for all of us that understand that what might be obvious to us when we are designing an app will very likely not be obvious to the rest of the world. So one way of improving this learnability curve is to bring consistency. It's a bit like when you are driving a car and you rent a car and you have the radio or the sound system in the middle of the dashboard, you know that the volume button will be most likely on the left or on the right, but most likely on the left because it's closer to the driver's hand. And very likely all the rest of the cars will also bring this volume button on the left. So it generates this repetition that allows us to quickly learn how we should operate a certain system. So it brings the cohesiveness and improves the learnability, eliminates confusion. I personally don't like at all when we open an app and it tells us to run a tutorial. For me, it's always like if they're telling us to run a tutorial, it's because the design is not as intuitive as we might expect. So we have to be really mindful of the icons we are using and not reinvent the wheel, but also bring repetition. In this page of Deliveroo, you have the menu of a restaurant, and you will see that every dish is presented with the same card style. So it's very easy for you to choose from salads or sausages on the bottom because every option looks exactly the same. So with these 5 elements, we bring this acronym to help you always remember and do the audit, the design audit based on this. So it's the SPAC: space, proximity, alignment, contrast, and consistency. I'm sure this is going to help you a lot every time you are discussing in the team and you're taking your decisions. Take your design through this and answer the questions if the space is allowing the scalability of your content, if the proximity is also helping the users to understand what are the visual elements that should be understood as a whole, the alignment to bring this calmness to your page. When things are misaligned, it feels a bit chaotic and you get actually anxious when you want to work with that web design, web page. The contrast to help us to read the content and understand what's more important and draw the attention, and consistency to help us to quickly learn how to use this app. Any questions so far? So let's move on. Now let's get into some design tips that are based in this the SPAC concept. Let's create great UI and understand how you can kick off your prototypes using already the best practices. Let's talk about typography a bit. Font combinations is the first thing. The first tip is it's always good to avoid using fonts of the same classification. Let's say you want to work with a different font for your headings and for your paragraphs. If you actually choose two fonts that are sans serif, like this first example that says, this is Helvetica heading, and then the P is a Montserrat, you will see that they are sans serif, but at the same time, they actually look different. But it feels a bit weird because Helvetica is a bit more narrow and Montserrat is a bit more, how can I call it? It's wider. So your design doesn't feel so good. But if you look to the example on the bottom, you just repeat Helvetica to the heading and to the subheading. So what's the trick here? The trick here is that if you want actually to work with a pair of fonts, it's better to choose two fonts that are quite different from each other than choosing fonts that are actually from the same family, serif, sans serif, etc. So there is a tool I'm going to share after this workshop that's called Font Pair that helps you to see what are the Google fonts that work well together. So the tip here is that do not use two sans serif or two serif fonts together. So if you're not confident, only choose one font family. But if you want to work with a font pair, be sure that they are very different from each other. So, for instance, font combinations. You can mix the serifs with sans serifs because it creates the contrast, all right? And avoid pairing fonts that are too similar. Also, you actually don't need to choose many different types of fonts for your design. With one, I'm sure you can bring great front end. But if you want to choose two, then you can use one of these tools at the bottom to help you to take the decision. Then these are the reading patterns I talked about regarding our eyes when we see a page for the first time. So we have the F pattern, and it applies to very text heavy pages like articles or blog posts. So this is the pattern that our eyes follow. But we also have the Z pattern, and it applies to other pages, posters or websites, or maybe to your landing page. When you have a lot of space between the elements, our eyes are just trying to scan and see if we find the information we're actually interested in. So taking these two patterns, we get to the conclusion that the best alignment for your text is actually justify left. Because the justify left for text heavy pages is basically bringing the shape of an F, you know, so it follows and fits really well with the F pattern. When you try to read first the lines and the first paragraph, very likely you're going to read it entirely, but then very likely the last paragraph is something we never get to the very end. And this is absolutely normal when it comes to web writing. And then the font visual hierarchy. The visual hierarchy is not just about small or big fonts. It's about the right mix of size, weight, and colors. It will create a contrast for you. So have a look at these two cards, this example. On the left, you have the don't, and on the right, you have the do. What's the main difference? On the left, you basically have a card with a picture, and it starts with a heading. And below the heading, you have this little label that is, in this case, is to indicate the location. And then you have a paragraph, and at the end, a button. So in this case, the contrast is just, the designer is just trying to create contrast by playing with the font size, you know, like capitalized, making it big, and then the label a bit smaller. But all of them are black, and all of them have regular boldness. So you're not playing with the thickness of the font. But on the other hand, in the right side, the right card, you will see that your heading is actually doesn't even need to be capitalized, because by making it bold and darker than the rest, it's already popping out of the screen. And the label, by changing a bit the opacity and making it light gray, it will already create this visual hierarchy we are looking for, right? And the same for the paragraph. So the paragraph in the end is another shade of gray that is darker than the label because it's more important than the label, but it also helps us to bring a more harmonic design for our card. And if you look to the button, then in the button, you can use capitalize. You don't need to make the font bigger, as we're gonna see in a few slides for the button. Also, to complement our visual hierarchy part, this is the trick. You don't need to be choosing different colors for your fonts, like to simplify your CSS, you can go for a darker shade for all your headings. So in this case, it's black with 85% opacity. You can see in the alpha channel of the RGBA. And then you can play a bit with this opacity to bring the paragraph intermediary, like the intermediate shade of gray. And for other less important text, you can make it even lighter. So for instance, for labels, when you want to give a little, like the paragraph or terms and conditions. So this is a good trick. So in the end, you have like 3 shades of gray, and you can play with that to improve the contrast. But the most important attribute of the typeface is the weight and the width of the strokes that compose the letters. So let's see this example. Look at the contrast. So when you have a light font and you combine that with bold headings, you will generate good contrast. And if you have a medium font that is a bit more, that's a bit thicker than the light, you can go with the extra bold. This is for you to make sure the audience notice the difference. Because if you look to the line, the first line, the bold and the extra bold, they are too similar. So it's better, to go to the very extreme and work with light and bold combination and a medium and extra bold. So look at this example on the font hierarchy. The heading is bold and darker than the paragraph, and the subheading, the subtitle, is darker than the P as well, and just smaller than the H1. Another very important attribute of font is the size, of course. Size matters. People will always read the bigger things first, always. That's why it's not a coincidence that when you get to a landing page the first time, you will see the value proposition with a way bigger font than all the rest, because this website, this business, or this product has a fraction of time, like a split second, to capture our attention. So you need to explain in a few words why you matter to this potential customer. That's why all these value propositions, they come in bigger font. So our eyes go to size before the word matters, for sure. And this is a pro tip on how you decide the font size of your project. There is a thing called font scale. So the font scale means that instead of just following 1 point or 1 pixel up every time you want to increase the font size, like you can see in this black box that says normal. So if you have a font of 6, then you just jump to 7 or 8 or 9 or 10. You actually apply a ratio, and you have many ratios. In this case, is called the perfect fourth ratio, where you increase by 33% the font size. So if your base font size is 16 pixels or point, if you want to have a heading just like bigger than your P, you can go to 21 points. And then you can jump, if you want a bigger font style, you can jump to 28 points, and then 37, and so on. It doesn't mean that you only have to jump to the next. You can actually skip one. So to give an example, let's say you have this page where you have a paragraph that's 16 pixels and you want a heading one, an H1, you can definitely choose an H1 of 37, all right? You can skip, but it will create a very harmonic relationship between these fonts. And we're gonna see it better when you do the live refactor of a Figma mockup. So look at this. This example, you have a sample heading that's 50 points and a subheading that's 28 points. Points is just another way of defining the size of your fonts. We are using pixels. It's fine as well. And then your base size, font size is 16 points. So you decide what would be your paragraph size, and then from there, you increase. So then you decide your H6, H5, H4, H3, H2, and H1. Of course, you don't need to have all these H options for your project. Maybe 3 headings would be more than enough. So look at this example, the sample heading, the sample subheading, and the P, they look very harmonic. It's not like a random choice anymore of what font size you're gonna apply. Then talking about consistency for typography, it's one of the most important things. So instead of having 3 different paragraph styles, you have just one, all right? Your paragraph will always look the same throughout all your pages. And the same goes for the other text elements in the same category. So overall, we just have to make sure the elements from the same category have the same font size, the font type, the color, the letter spacing, the line spacing. So look at this example. If you're already working with the paragraph, you know, the heading in bold and the paragraph with this font and this font size and this shade of gray, you should just be consistently applying the same style for every combination of heading and paragraph, just like this example. All right? And not only in one single page, but throughout the whole application. Also allows you to go way more efficiently, like to bring your design to life. Next set of tips for buttons. I shared this on Slack some days ago. It was part of the slide deck, so let's have a look together. So let's talk about button hierarchy as well. So you have from the low emphasis button, that's basically just a link that has no like border or background color, is just a text with a nice color that very likely should be your brand color, your primary color, the color you choose to be the visual identity of your app. And we move from the low emphasis to the high emphasis. So the medium emphasis is for those call to actions that are important, but they are not the most important ones. In some cases, although we always focus on having just one call to action per page, sometimes you're going to need two. For instance, when you are on a marketplace and you want somebody to book something, but you also want somebody to post something, right? So you focus, depending on the landing page you can focus on that. So the medium emphasis button, one of the techniques you can use to create this hierarchy is to play with this ghost button. So you just do the positive and negative effect. You know, the positive would be your primary button with your brand color as a background, and then your ghost button will just have no background, and the color will be applied on your text and your border. You guys already use that for your Airbnb projects. And then you have, for instance, the toggle button as an example. So you just like play with the positive, negative effect. It's like a switcher. What are the button shapes? So you have the totally flat button. And if I'm not wrong, Uber has a total flat design. And so they have these very sharp corners. And then you have the rounded button that I'm sure you're gonna recall Spotify. And then third option, you have the rounded corners button where you smoothen a bit the very sharp corners of your button. What's the best one? It will depend. It would depend on what is the feel you want to bring to your app. Flat, for instance, is very like a minimalist design. The rounded will bring even more attention to your buttons, and it will create even more feeling of identity. And the rounded corners is, according to some research, what enhances the information processing because it draws our eyes directly to the center of the element, which is where we're going to find the button label. The only thing you should avoid here is to generate, too much rounded corners that is not even, fully rounded as they are the option in the middle, nor the last one. So it just like becomes something in between. So either you go with, just like smoothing a bit the corners, or you make it fully rounded. Buttons, everybody, they are very important because they are the visual element that will bring immediately the identity to your page. So you can even like close your eyes right now and remember how Spotify has this rounded button in green. And it's so Spotify, by just applying this style to the buttons, you're already bringing a visual identity, and a strong one. What about the padding? So in the padding, as we commented before on the feedback on Airbnb, buttons should not be just like a text with background. So how do you make a button look like a real button? It's playing with the padding. So you don't actually play with the height or the width of a button. You just play with the padding of your A element, your link element. And how does it work? In this example, and most of times, you just have to add more padding left and right than you add to the top and bottom. And one trick I always use is to use multiples of 4, just not to come up with random elements. The reason behind 4 pixels, there is an article called the 8-point grid. It's because the vast majority of the screen resolutions, they are divided, they can be divided by 8 or 4. So this way, you're basically occupying a space in the page that fits exactly with the amount of pixels you have available. So you create harmony by using this. So in this case of this button, you have a padding 20 pixels top and bottom and 48 left and right. Then little do's and don'ts. This example, you have this red button with a very hard shadow and a big font as a label. Better to go with the option, the green option, not because of the color, but just because of the way the shadow is defined and the size of the label. The main difference here is that the shadow is way more smooth. It feels a bit like long distance, and the label is just smaller because the button already draws a lot of attention. You don't need to go with bigger labels. So here's this, the recap. The buttons are a reflection of an overall feel and look. So we should not be afraid of decreasing the font size because the button itself already draws attention. So we don't need to oversize the label, all right? And then when using big letters for the label, you can make a little bit of space between them. So have a look here again. Notice that the letter spacing of the first label and the second label, they are different. On the green button, there is a bit like maybe 2 pixels of letter spacing. And let's make sure that when you drop the shadow, it's not too strong, not too heavy, all right? Also talking about shadows. Let's use the shadows to show depth, not only as visual aesthetics. So shadows should be used not only because you like shadows, but rather because you want to even make this element pop out even more from the screen. So it's a technique that's more connected to the function than to the aesthetics only, all right? So there is a nice formula to bring nice shadows. The secret formula. You can start with opacity 35%, and then your X displacement of the shadow could be set to 0. Your Y could be set to 20 to 18 to 24. Sometimes I even set it to 0 as well. And I just let the blur be the effect that spreads the shadow a bit. All right, so there is another trick about this shadow. Maybe you're gonna notice, maybe not, but the thing is that the color of the shadow is not just gray. It's actually the same color of the button. So it creates a bit this glow effect, and it makes the shadow feels more natural. So this is the tip. You can use the color for the shadow similar to the button color. So if you look to the login, the purple one feels not so nice and as the blue one. The blue one feels more natural. Anybody have questions? No?
Yes, I had one,
Yeah.
Gus.
Yeah, go ahead.
Do you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Thomas.
So my question would be, can you use multiple button shapes on the same web app or in the same web page?
Well, if we think about consistency, I think it's not a good idea. Because everybody should understand that your call to action looks the same. So they know that every time they see this element, that would be the button, they should just recognize it. It's just it's not very consistent if you just like have like a fully rounded button and then another flat button. So because the buttons are the elements that can bring the most identity to your app, the recommendation is to go with one shape. You decide the shape and then you just bring the shape across all pages.
All right, and the same with colors, I assume.
Yeah, you basically gonna have primary buttons, maybe secondary buttons, but maybe all your primary buttons, maybe not like for sure, all your primary buttons should look exactly the same. This is about the learnability and consistency.
Yeah,
All right?
I meant like multiple button types, but thank you. That makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, cool. You might see some apps where you see different button shapes, but it's very rare. I would say it's not a very good practice, especially if they are on the same page. It's even worse. Best way to differentiate buttons is just to play with the positive, negative, or the border, no border, but they should be mainly very similar or the same. More questions? Okay. Now, talking about colors. Colors, they also transmit a lot of feelings. So the decision for colors can also be objective based on what do you want to bring, what type of emotion you want to evoke. So if you see the psychology of colors, you can see that the red brings energy, attention, courage, and passion. And while the blue, for instance, is more about freedom and trustworthiness. So for instance, if you think about insurance websites, what color are usually insurance brands and websites?
Blue.
Blue, right? So it's not a coincidence. Like they want to transmit trustworthiness. Banks are also using a lot of shades of blue. And then if you think about the yellow, yellow is about happiness, opportunity, positivity, enthusiasm. And it's a very common color on travel websites. So airlines like Vueling or Booking.com, it's the blue, but the yellow is the color on their main call to actions. Expedia, same thing, yellow. eDreams, same thing, yellow. So they are trying to evoke this positiveness, this enthusiasm. They want you to travel, right? And Le Wagon, for instance, is the red, because our value proposition is change your life, learn to code. And you might agree with me that you need some courage to change your life like this. Black, for instance, can you name an app that has been using black as their main primary color? Anything that comes to your mind from top of mind?
Uber.
Yes, correct. Uber. Uber did not so long a time ago a redesign, and their style guide is public. I can share this link with you, and you will see their explanations. But basically, Uber has been always about efficiency, has actually Uber started, and I think we discussed that in the workshop I ran in the very beginning of the batch, that they were about people who were willing to pay a bit extra for a luxury ride. And a luxury ride that were like based on cars that were SUVs and luxury sedans. So the black is the elegance, right? The authority, the power. So it has, it's a no-brainer for them that black was the color to choose. So let's have a look on these examples. You have Airbnb, and Airbnb has this kind of shade of pink as a brand color, and they use the white as their canvas color. Uber has been like using the black and the white, of course, to generate the contrast. And they also have this, it's not their primary color. On their style guide, they call it safety color. So this blue is for them when they want to really bring the attention for something really important. They apply this blue. So it's okay for you to have secondary color. The most important thing is then how do you actually play with the application of these colors on your app. And we're gonna see it in the next slide. And the Deliveroo has this super vivid green, and they are mainly an app that has a light theme, so the canvas is always white. So let's have a look on Airbnb. Airbnb has the primary or the brand color where they create a depth and they draw the attention. They apply it to their main buttons, the primary buttons, and of course at the logo, in the logo. Then they use the secondary color optionally for some little links and less important elements. For instance, I think if I'm not wrong, they apply it to the stars of the ratings, and it's just little touches of green. So the tip is always start with a primary color. You don't need to go ahead and choose a color swatch of like 4 or 5 colors just because you like them, because it's gonna make your life harder for you to decide where do you apply them. So pick a primary color, apply it to your call to actions, and if you need a secondary one, your app will ask. You will feel that you actually need to bring a second one. So let's start always with one primary color. You can play with the shades of this color, but let's stick to that. And you can always bring a secondary color for the little sparks, let's say, or sprinkles. So have a look at this, the color balance. Although Airbnb has the pink as a primary color, if you have a look on their app, the application of this color is just a little fraction of the whole look and feel. At Uber has been using a lot of the black as well. So they have some pages that have even the black background, and they play with the white to generate the contrast. And even Slack with the super colorful logo, the primary color is that purple actually. So this is important because if you look to the application of the color balance, this is a do. So you have the page has a white background. You have like good font hierarchy, and then the call to action with the primary color. And the stars at the rating, if you see, you can see the stars are actually green. Just a little touch. So it's not so boring to just apply the brand color there again. So it brings it a bit of more, it's more vivid. This is very different from just taking the color swatch of Airbnb and doing something like this, right? So that's why the recommendation is always start like from less, and then if you need to add a little touch, you go ahead and add it. But if you just choose a color swatch because you like and you don't see it in context, this is the challenge. So in color, the contrast is also key. Sometimes we just decide to do a button and we apply a very light shade of a primary color and we come and we put the text in white. The problem is that the readability will be awful. So the max amount of contrast you can have is actually black over white or vice versa. So the rule is basically always playing with a dark and light, never like washed out colors for text and background. So if you see the example on the top, the green, you know, you can play with the white background and the green fonts or vice versa. But if you go with like a very light color for the background and you choose also light color for your fonts, it's not okay. Your contrast will suffer from that. There is a contrast calculator if you're not sure if it generates a good contrast. It indicates you the ratio and it tells you, you know, that's a good one or that's actually recommended to increase the contrast. On images, you can also use the colors to bring more contrast. So you never control if you have like images that are uploaded by the user and you want to have something like this, like a banner. You never control if the image will have a predominance of a darker or a lighter color. So in this case, if you have like a white font, what do? Well, the trick is to basically bring overlay. I think you already played with that on CSS. You just create, it's kind of a filter. You just create this little layer and it also brings a lot of identity as well. That's actually cool. You know, let's say you have a website where the primary color is orange. You can also play with a bit of orange overlay in all your images and it will create this uniform feeling for your whole app. I've seen apps doing that and it's actually a nice trick. Of course, it should be very subtle on the images, but it helps a lot to generate this contrast as well. All right, so this is the theory. And now I would like to show you something really quick, or maybe not so quick, but let's go. Any questions so far? No? So let's have a look on, Leon, you want to speak?
No, sorry.
Okay. So let's have a look, everybody, on this Figma here. It's a mock-up of an app that's called Eventer. It's a fake one. And it's an app that allows you to discover, enjoy the best events in your town. So here, as you can see, you have a nav bar, an H1. Then you have a search bar with a button. And then you have cards. So let's do a bit of like the spec audit in this. So in terms of space, proximity, alignment, contrast, and consistency. I'm going to create a copy of it and I'm going to do some refactoring. So first thing, let's start with space. The things right now, they are not even like letting the whole, like they are not breathing. The cards are really close to each other. So have a look on what effect you can generate by just adding space. I'm gonna make the frame a bit longer and I'm gonna space the elements a bit more. Imagine this is our home, right? So basically, let's bring this whole group of cards more to the bottom. And let's place, because this is my main call to action, I want to place it more to the middle, all right? And also my text like this, for instance. So in terms of space, I can even let these cards breathe a bit more. And if I play my prototype, there is a little window here. Okay, I'm gonna play it. It's very important that you always play your prototype so you can see the general effect. So have a look at this. This is the original. This is the one that we played with space. Do you see how our eyes goes directly to the search box and we can see the call to action? But now, as I told before, we should bring some visual hierarchy because things are looking very flat right now. Nothing is really popping up. So what can you do here? Well, let's grab, for instance, this H1. And if you go to font scale to decide what size of our fonts should be, so because I don't want to choose just a random size, I'm gonna open Chrome. And let's go to type scale. So this is the tool I was referring before. And here you can see all the different scale you can use. I'm gonna go for the perfect fourth. So if my font size, let's set to 18 pixels, which is, from my experience, the minimum size for the font not to feel really small, your paragraphs, then you will see that here on the scale, we can have 18 for my P, 24, let's round it, for my H3, and then 32, and we can even go to 42 for my H1. So how about that? Let's try first 42, or if it's too big, we choose 32. So here on Figma, I select my text, and let's change it to 42. And not only this, remember, headings and value propositions are very important. Let me just fix this. So why not tell this to go bold, right? Cool. It already brings a lot of visual hierarchy to this mockup. So now, what do? Let's talk about alignment a bit, because have a look at this, and maybe you're gonna look to your prototypes and you're gonna see the same. Here we have a navbar. Our logo is starting here, and maybe it's not even aligned with our H1. And then you have the box here kind of floating in the middle. So what can you do to help you to bring the best alignment to your page? Use the rulers. So here on Figma, you can drag a ruler in. Now let's say, let's give it like maybe some pixels here, 21 pixels. And I set the margin on the left, and I do the same on the right. And then the trick is, let's just like align everything to this ruler, right? And we're gonna bring this calmness that we need to make the look and feel be just simply awesome. And the same like to the rest of the cards, and also here to my burger menu. We align it. And once you have it, you just apply it for all the pages. You use the ruler to bring this consistency. Now that I have the ruler, what I can do is just like grab this search bar and take the whole width, you know, respecting the margins I just created. If you play it, it's already starting to look way more, like way nicer than this. Our eyes are feeling way more comfortable to see this and scroll than this. So let's move, and let me give you a few tips regarding sizes. You can see here we have an input element, and we have a button here. One tip for you is that the minimum size for this to look nice in a phone, because remember, you are using your thumb to click on these things, so you have to have a certain area for that. On iPhone, the decision of the icons of the apps were taken based on the size area of the area we generate when we touch our thumb on the screen. So a good size for this is minimum 50 pixels high. I'm gonna even go for 55. And I'm gonna do the same with my button. And select my rectangle to be 55. So always use this size, everybody, for your buttons and for your input fields. You can go with 50 to 55, and you're gonna be fine. Then what we need as well, alignment again. So have a look on the navbar. My logo is closer to the bottom. So if I select my logo and we want to make sure it's aligned properly with the burger menu, you can select both of them plus the background. So let's go again. It's a bit slow. I'm using Shift and my cursor, and then I'm not picking the background somehow. So let me pick from here. You can also do this. You pick all of them, and then you select the vertical alignment here. So you align the vertical centers. Of course, I should have grouped my lines so this effect doesn't happen. So this is why it's so important sometimes to group things first. So let's group this. So with Command G, now I have a group, and now I can do the same process again to have it perfectly aligned in the middle. Same thing with the button here. I want my label to be perfectly aligned in the middle. So I select the label, I select the background, and I click here, align vertical and also the horizontal. The horizontal didn't work because look at my text area for the search. It's too big. So what can you do to fit exactly the size of my label? You double click the corner and now it becomes exactly the area you need for your text. So you select the label, select the background and align center. Voila. You might be thinking, hey Gus, I think this 55 is a bit too tall. Yes, maybe because I'm zooming it. But if you play your prototype, you see that's not that bad. All right, this is a good area for our thumb to click. What else? So we have this little label here, filter by event. It's quite tiny font. And as we said that our P should be an 18. So what would be the, according to our type scale, a smaller size when you need like these little labels? It would be 13.50. And we can even round it to 14. So if you don't want to use decimal. So let's set it to 14. And then, because it's a helper for my input field, I can even have it as a placeholder. So why not like place it inside? And when I place inside, make sure that we actually have it on top of the other elements on your search bar. But then it's maybe too small. 14 for this, it's not really helping people to read it properly. So we can basically set it to the 18 pixels, which is my P size. And because it's a placeholder, I'm gonna play with the opacity and I'm gonna put it to 50%, right? What else can I do? Let's improve the contrast of this search bar because they are both like gray. So what can we do? Let's make the lighter background for my input field. Because it's an input field, it doesn't need to have like a strong background. People need to have the feeling that you can actually type inside. So what about this? And now I'm generating already a good contrast between the button and the input field. And last but not least, let's improve the contrast of this button. So if I make it even darker, I'm not gonna play with colors now, all right? It's just wireframe, black and white. I make it darker, and then you're gonna agree with me that reading this search is not the best task our eyes will appreciate. So let's put it to white, and let's improve this contrast. So have a look, everybody. Is it becoming more comfortable to the eyes or not? So I think we are done with this first part. So if I go to my prototype, have a look. Look how we played with the space to allow our eyes to draw attention to the elements we want. And then we improve the contrast, the proximity as well. We put the placeholder inside our input, so it's part of the input as a placeholder. And now let's fix a bit these cards. So first thing I'm gonna do, everything is so squeezed, there is not even padding on this card. So let's move it a bit to the bottom and open a bit some space. And let's just like get this background a bit bigger because we're gonna change the font size. So here the font is 16 pixels. 18 is the base font size we decided for our P. So let's see if it works with 18, but actually we could apply an H2 here. So what would be the size of our H2? So 18 is the paragraph, our H2 could be 24. So let's set this title to 24. And because it's a heading, I'm gonna improve the contrast and the visual hierarchy by making it bold. So then I need to open a bit of space between this heading and my P. And of course, allow this content to breathe, adding some padding on the left and the right. So then I do the same, remember alignment. So the P should follow this same space that I'm adding. Just reduce the text box here. And then we have these two little labels here. That is very likely the category of the event, networking and tech, that for the moment I'm gonna place them here at the bottom. So I'm adding a lot of space and separating these elements. Open a bit of more space here. And then this part here that says that 20 people joined, I'm gonna align it exactly with my other labels, all right? And then what should we do with this date here? For the moment, let's put it outside and fix this. All right, so our card is already breathing way more. Let's have the same padding on the top that we have for the left. All right, so look at the difference. I add the padding on the left, but imagine if I keep it like this, still doesn't look good. So we need to create this balance, top and bottom the same. And then I can place this text of the P in the middle. I generate the same margin between the P and my subheading that I have to my labels. Look at how my card is already way easier to read and to find information we want. Then what else can we do in this card? Let's fix this shadow, because this shadow is too hard. And the idea of the shadow is to allow it to bring some nice effect to make this content pop out a bit. So let's change here and let's put a bit of more blur, let's say 20, and create this long distance shadow, 0. And we can even make it a bit lighter by changing the opacity. So we generate this very trendy, you see that the border of the card and the shadow, they are more well defined if the shadow is just a bit lighter. And what we need to do to fix this alignment of the card is to just align exactly with my margin on the right. So do you see? Maybe we have more padding on the bottom. So let's fix it by just moving a bit up the background. And now I have a nicer card. And then you might be thinking, okay, Gus, what do we do? Let me just delete these two. What do we do with the date? Yeah, because we want to squeeze too much information inside this card. Good question. So the date we can maybe try, does it work here? Does it work there? So you can get some inspiration from, calendar components. You want to show a date like a little calendar style. So look at this. I'm gonna actually create another component that will be part of this card actually. It's just a rectangle. Let's move this date here. And let's, of course, move this rectangle to the bottom. And then we can squeeze the text inside like this, for instance, and play with visual hierarchy, because the day is more important than the month and the hour. So we can make the day 18 pixels and we can make it bold. All right. And then we make it a bit smaller box like this, vertical. I'm gonna group the elements. But let me show a little trick. Let's say you want to make sure this text is all aligned, inside the square. You can play with the font line spacing. So we squeeze a bit the month, to make it fit with the hour, and we can bring it a bit bigger. And look at this. Now it's perfectly aligned. The text fits exactly in my square. So now what can we do with these elements? We can maybe bring it here. What about that? With a different background. So let's make the background of the card lighter. Yeah. Let's just make it like this. Almost, we can actually make it white, right? Because we have a nice shadow. Look at this, everybody. And then I make it a component. The toolbar from Zoom is actually covering it. So I'm gonna just make copies of this guy. And then make sure you give enough space between them. With Command D, you can just duplicate. So you don't need to do Command C, Command D. And then let's bring a bit of more visual hierarchy. So I can make my P a bit lighter. So let's let the heading dark, and we set the P to 70%. All right, and maybe this label to even 50%, because it's not that important. So more visual hierarchy. And the final trick to help you sometimes bring of more, nice design to your projects. I'm going to show you how you can make this networking and tech a bit nicer. So introducing an element that I'm sure you're familiar with, the pills. Maybe you are not familiar with the name, but I'm sure if I say tags, you're gonna know what I'm talking about. So what can you do here to these two guys? You can bring a rectangle and put this text around this rectangle. All right, of course, let's move it under the networking inside my cards. All right, and instead of having a background, we get rid of the background, but we add a little stroke. And to make it different from the button is actually a pill. So how do you design a pill? You just make it rounded corner. So for instance, you could have a new element that is a pill that you can use, when you want to filter. You can use it for designing checkboxes in a nicer way. Of course, I would do that the same on the tech. All right. Then once you have this design and it looks good, black and white, have a look. Have a look at the difference. Oh, loading. So once you're happy with it, look at the difference, right? So once you're happy with it, this is the moment where you're gonna add your little color touches. So let's say I decided that my Inventor page will have a brand color that's purple. What do? I apply it to my call to actions. So I get the purple I chose to be the color of my button. Oh, actually, I like this blue. Why not? All right. And then I can do the same to bring a bit this color to my pills, for instance, to the text and to the border radius, or to the border. So we choose the same blue. Also to the border of my rectangle. And look at this, everybody. You're already bringing some visual identity to it. And voila, we have a nice mock-up without even adding pictures. So this is a good sign. When your design looks already nice without having pictures, it's because you are on the right track. All right, any questions? Let's play. Look at this. Cool or not cool? Any questions? Okay, people.
Cool.
So yeah, go ahead. Any, Eileen?
Not just cool.
All right. So little bonus points, everybody. How do you actually collaborate now together? Because I'm sure you might be confused, like to bring this consistency to your project. So how do I actually work when I create a new project? I create first my components library. So have a look at this. I have all my components generated in one frame called UI kit, and I transform all of them into components on Figma. So how do I use it actually? Once I have a new frame that I need to create, let's say I have here my, oops, let's choose, by the way, let's work with iPhone 8. So let's choose here, iPhone 8 Plus. So once you have the pages of your user flow, so let's say you have like 3 steps to check out. What can you do here? You click here on assets. Assets, once you create your library of components. So what are the elements typically that you can find in a library of components? All my headings, so I have H1, H2, H3, my P and my label following the font scale, an input field for my forms, a nice checkbox, so a normal checkbox and an active checkbox. There is a tutorial on Kit to teach you how to design checkboxes like this, so it's not boring, you know, just like the little empty box. I have a pill. I have a primary button, sorry, should be the large version, so LG. I have a ghost button and I have a smaller version of the button. The same for avatar, the normal avatar, the small avatar. I have also generate tabs. I have a card vertical. I have a card category that will have a picture on the background. I have a square version of my category card. And I have this big card here that I called card large, and also a component called inbox. So how does it work? Imagine that you are collaborating and you want to, you know, create a new page that still doesn't exist in your project. What do? You go to the assets, and then you open your UI kit, and then let's start, for instance, with the navbar. So you drag the navbar from your library to your page, right? And you position it properly. Okay. Cool. And then let's say I want to have my dashboard. So I can bring a dashboard by using some inbox. So I can put an inbox here. Remember, bring back the rulers. Otherwise, you're going to have the same problem of alignment. So bring the rulers back, align it with your logo and the burger menu. And that's it. So then you do Command D and you generate all my inboxes. Command D, all my inbox. And then let's say, now that you decide your colors, you go here to your library of components. And let's say you want to change this and apply your branded color. All right, like this, for instance. When you go back to your components, you see, super cool. So this is how you efficiently create a design system for your app. Questions? Okay, everybody, so this is the design workshop. I'm going to share this content with you. I'm going to share the link of this Figma with you on Slack. And now I wish that you have a lot of fun refactoring your prototypes. If you have any questions, just reach me out. If you have doubts on the tools that I shared, just hit me on Slack. All right. Thank you very much for spending your lunch with me on this workshop, and let's keep it up and bring amazing apps to life.
Woo! Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.